There is a paradox of having everything, but at the same time being nothing. We cannot agree on that in life it's not enough to have, but you need to explode. When we see cases like the ones of Bolivia and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, they both seem as countries that are rich and have a lot of natural resources like gold, petroleum, silver or coltan. But what we see in real life is that even though they may seem to have optimal conditions for development and economic growth, they are still poor and underdeveloped. When we analyze other examples, like Singapore or Norway, we see that Singapore is a country that has almost no land, and Norway is a country that has winter 11 months a year. But both have really great economies that rank number 5 and number 8 in the GDP per capita ranking. So we ask ourselves, does geography can have any relationship with economy? Can we make a hypothesis to state that difficult conditions in countries may bring success? Nietzsche said, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, meaning that difficult experiences in life will help you develop and progress. A psychological experiment from Brown University tried to prove the thoughts that Nietzsche had. They analyzed more than 2,000 people over 3 years, and the conclusions that they found were the following. People that had many difficult experiences in their life had bad consequences. They destroyed their life. But at the same time, the people that had no difficult experiences in life, they were equally as bad. They expressed the same problems that people that had a lot of bad experiences. The interesting conclusion was that people that had balanced amount of negative experiences had the best outcome. Dr. Siri concluded that difficult experiences give the chance to develop and to become tougher to face other situations. So, we could ask ourselves if this psychological experiment could be applied and translated into country situations. If we go back to our examples, we could think and say that Bolivia and El Congo have no geographical problems because they're really rich in natural resources, but they have a lot of problems in other aspects like institutions. And countries like Singapore and Norway have a balanced amount of problems that help them progress and become tougher to face other situations.
Okay, so now let's analyze some data. This train of thought that says that naturally rich countries may have an advantage in terms of creating a civilization or creating a prosperous society is not always true. So here's some data. As a first aspect, we might see how Norway, for example, or how Singapore are countries that may have very low contributions of agriculture or low contribution in terms of resources, but at the same time they have a very high GDP or a very high index of human development. So, on the other hand, we can see how countries like Congo or countries like Bolivia may have a contribution of agriculture that is much higher, but at the same time they rank very low in terms of human development or in terms of GDP. So now let's analyze the case of Brazil. Brazil was a country that had a very specific type of soil that it's called oxide soil. And oxide soil, it's not very good for agriculture because it has a high HP and because of its lack of nutrients in the surface of the soil. However, as a governmental program, Brazil decided to treat this land, and nowadays this land produces the 70% of the agricultural income. So we might think of Brazil as the balance, because they had these agricultural problems, but at the same time they managed to solve these problems, and therefore this provided a very important growth for Brazil. So Brazil is a very important case because of the balance that it represents in terms of opportunities and in terms of problems. Now let's talk about a very important factor, that it's biodiversity. These are some of the countries that may rank in the first places of this list, and are, for example, Peru, Colombia, Venezuela, Mexico, and Congo. But this should open, for example, many doors, and this should open many possibilities in terms of patents, in terms of medical research, in terms of many aspects that might produce an economical growth for these countries. But the thing is, it's not being used. The thing is that these possibilities of natural resources and these possibilities aren't useful in these countries, and agriculture, it's just a base, and it's just something that is there, but it's not being taken advantage of. So the question stands firm: is the only option agriculture? Of course not. We might see, for example, how the most valuable companies in China are not even slightly related to agriculture, and are not even slightly related to exploiting products. India, for example, as well, has a contribution to the GDP of around the 53.7%. And this is very important because it shows how it's not having, but it's using. It's not having resources, but it's knowing how to manage things, and it's knowing how to produce things. And we might see this in the fact that this industry has been growing in an average of 20% each year. China's companies are, among the 70% of these most valuable companies, are related to software, airlines, and other stuff that is not mainly related to the resources or richness that this country might have. I mean, China is a very rich country, but it is not taking its primary growth from that area, but of the service and of intellectual material. So now we have this question: are resources enough to thrive? Well, maybe not.
Now we're going to talk about an overlooked relationship between economics and geography. If we see the GDP equation, we can see that there are some variables, but there isn't a variable that talks about geography. We believe that geography is an important variable that should be taken into account, not as shown in the example, but latitude can affect the way in which countries develop. Now let's take a look to the next example. This is a map of the world members of the OECD community. We have in blue the members, and in black the non-members, and we can see how every member is in the south and in the north, and the countries in the middle part of the world, I mean in the crater line, are not members of this community that helps to drive the economies of the world. There's strong evidence that geography plays an important role in economics. In the next map, we can see the income distribution of the world. In this map, we see again that the highest income countries that have higher income are in the north and in the south. Well, the countries in the crater line are less developed and have a lower income. If we analyze Africa, we can see that this happened also within the continent. In Africa, the countries that have the highest income are in the north and in the south, while the countries that are in the crater line in the middle of Africa are underdeveloped. We can see the same relationship in Brazil. From historical times, the temperate south has outperformed the north states of Brazil. If we see this map, we can see how the GDP of the northern states is compared with African states. Well, the southern part of Brazil has states that are compared with highly developed countries. What does this mean? That the countries that are in the upper part of Brazil, closer to the equator, are far more underdeveloped than the countries the states that are farther away from the equator line. Now, if we analyze the development and evolution of the GDP of the temperate zones and the non-temperate zones, we can see how back in 1820 the GDP of the temperate zones was of $800, and then in 1992 it was of $10,000, while the GDP of the non-temperate zones of the tropical countries was of, at first in 1820, of $500, and then in 1992 of $2,500. We can see that first the non-temperate countries had a 68% of the GDP of the temperate zone, and then it had 25% in 1992. What does this mean? That we are getting worse and worse. And the fact, the reason why this has been happening is that we have been trying to develop resources and not the human potential. If we try to develop the imagination and on the power of the people, we're going to get productive entities that will look for technology and different aspects and tools that will enable the country to develop. The best example of this is oil. We can see a lot of countries that are supposedly successfully economically, such as Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela, because they have large income due to their oil. But the truth is that this is not the reality of the country. Bahrain was the first country to develop to exploit their oil, but then when the oil ran out, they started to develop to empower the people, and this has led to the thrive of the nation in economics. According to the Harvard study, the tropical regions have remained in a low technology agriculture and concentrated in that, while the temperate regions have developed high technology, manufacturing, and services. What does it mean? That we're being lag behind. What's the conclusion of this? That the policymakers should focus should main their policies with geography, and not because of tourism, but because of productivity, because economics can thrive in the right context, and if we don't analyze the context of the country, they are not going to thrive. So, we have to balance the advantages and the disadvantages of the context in order to get the perfect policy that will enable the country to thrive.